What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the fighting game tutorial series, we are going to be going over advanced frame data, and this time we're going to be going over automatic frame data. So we had covered manual frame data in the series, and it really does have some perks. I talked about them a little bit during those episodes, but there is also some reason to have automatic frame data, and they have perks to those systems as well. Getting started here, you see I'm in practice mode and I have my frame window widgets up here so I can see my damage, stun frame startup, active recovery, and frame advantage. If I am to attack, you'll see that the frame data is calculated, just like this. If I am to attack my opponent, you'll see frame advantage is also calculated. You'll see it is consistent despite being automatic, and if I do different attacks, it will change them as well, as long as the data in them is different. Now, not all my attacks are set up to be different, so a lot of times you won't see a change. But this is likely just because my attacks are set up to use the same data in the data tables. Now, if you see negative values, this means they are not set up the same way at all, such as my projectiles and my throws, which we will be covering in this episode, so not to worry. But regardless, this data is automatic now. Now, there is one thing to note before we get started. So these frames that are listed here are the number of frames that pass in the game when this data happens. So there are a few differences here and a few things we have to keep track of and take note of, and we may want to change our system around just a little bit to make sure things are working as expected. So notice when I don't attack the opponent, my active frames is 12. When I actually hit the opponent, my active frames is 22. This is because hit stop occurs, and that amount of hit stop is enough to change the amount of frames between not hitting the opponent and hitting the opponent by 10. So this method that I'm going to show you today does have the ability to display things like that. However, that probably should not be the case. We have ways around displaying this. But to keep things simple for today's episode and not super complicated, what we're going to do is just take the start frame and the end frame of each of these sections, subtract them, and display the data. We will have another episode on automatic frame data, just like we did for manual data, to organize this a little bit and clean these things up so there's no discrepancies, there's no differences in attacks or hit stop that makes it so that a startup, the active recovery frames, or the frame advantage are different, because we want them to be the same. If they're automatic, we don't want them to change whether we hit the opponent or whether hit stop was applied or not. Anyway, with all that out of the way, we can go ahead and get started on our automatic frame data journey. This is a code and blueprint tutorial series. Today we're going to be starting in the code, so I'm going to go to Visual Studio and I'm going to go to my fighter template character.h. This is my base character's header file, and essentially we're coming in here because we want to store the startup, active, and recovery frame data. From the manual frame data episodes, we do have variables for that, but that's actually not what I'm interested in storing right now. I'm interested in storing the frame number of all the actions that we need to keep track of. And this will make sense when I show it to you. So let's scroll down to our variables, and specifically I want to go to my integers or somewhere around there. I typically group all my variables up, but I have these int64s I've added for today's episode, 4 of them. I have start attack frame, first active frame, first recovery frame, and end attack frame. These 4 variables will allow us to track when all of these notable points occurred. So when we start the attack into when we start the first active frame. If we subtract the first active frame from start attack frame, we can get the result as the startup frames, the number of startup frames for that attack. If we take the first recovery frame and subtract the first active frame, the difference between those is the number of active frames. If we take the end attack frame and subtract the first recovery frame, the difference between those is the amount of recovery frames that we have. So these 4 variables are going to allow us to track the startup, active, and recovery frames that we want to do automatically. Note that the last startup, last active, and last recovery frames I had moved to manual frame data as the category, but I think I've decided I'm going to just change this to just be frame data. And for these 4 new variables that I have, I'm going to keep the category as automatic frame data. So I haven't gotten rid of any of my manual behavior or my other variables that I used in previous episodes. We're actually still going to use them as well. The only difference is we're not filling them with data from the data tables, but instead what we calculate from these 4 variables. Now to create these 4 variables, I am using integer 64s because the frames from Unreal are returned as integer 64s. Your frame count can be quite large, and so it may be above the size of a normal integer, and so they use integer 64s. You could cut these down by modding them by a certain size, that way it always fits within the range of a standard integer, and we probably will do that for optimization. So int64 start attack frame. This is when we are going to initially enter the command, really the attack. You could technically do it on any command, but things like dashes, runs, they don't need to track the startup, active, and recovery frames unless you want them to. So I called it start attack frame. And I made it a U property, that is edit anywhere, blueprint read write, so we can edit it and access it in the blueprint, but I gave it a category of automatic frame data so we know it's from today's episode and not the previous episodes. Now I'm going to comment these variables while we're here. So the start attack frame is the frame that the last used attack started on, because that's literally what it is. When we start going from idle to the attack, that's the frame we want to capture. That's the first frame when we've entered this new attack animation. The next integer 64 is first active frame. So this is when we spawn the active hitbox. The red hitbox that actually does damage, we call it the strike hitbox in this tutorial series. So we're going to say the frame the strike hitbox was created on during the last used attack. Now we have the first recovery frame, and you start going into recovery once your active frames are done. So basically once the strike hitbox is cleared, once we enter the attack recovery state, then we want to track that first frame. So we're going to say the frame the strike hitbox was cleared during the last used attack. And I like to get these just right, so sometimes you'll see me change little things in my comments, but these are important when reading these back, so I'm going to try and make sure I get these right. Now the end attack frame is when we finish the attack entirely and we're returning to idle. We want to capture that because that's how long the recovery took, from the first recovery frame to being able to return to idle and do other actions. So the frame the last used attack ended. There we go. I think those are my 4 comments. These are my 4 variables that I want to add for today's episode. Now, if we go to the fighter template character.cpp, we want to set default values for these variables. And so we can scroll down to a random section in here. I'm going to do it under my other frame behavior. So right here, start attack frame equals 0. We're going to do first active frame equals 0. First recovery frame equals 0. And end attack frame equals 0. So default all those to 0, because when we don't have any data, when this character is spawned, they're all going to be 0. Now we could set a lot of these variables in the code and be accurate, but since they are animation based and we have our AnimBP with our state machine, that has not been transferred over to a code state machine. I'm going to do it in the animation blueprint, so everything is together. So I'm going to launch the editor again at this point. Alright, the editor is back open, so I'm going to go to my animation blueprint for any character that I want. I'm going to go to my mutant AnimBP, and now I'm in my event graph for my AnimBP. So what we need to do is determine where we want to set all 4 of those variables we made. The first one is the start attack frame. And remember, that is when we go from idle to an attack. Now, if we go to our state machine, we have something to do this. Idle to command 1, for example. We click on this transition rule. We have a start transition event that calls a custom blueprint event start attack transition. This start transition event will fire as soon as we start transitioning from idle to this command. That is the first frame that we want to track. So we want to go to our start attack transition, and we can search for it. Start attack transition, and go to that anim notify. And in here it's really ugly because I want to remember to show this off. So we're going to organize it right now. But here's start attack transition, and I'm going to do it for start throw transition as well. because we actually have a little bit different behavior for our throw and we had a different anim notify, so we might as well do it for both of these. So let's go ahead and organize this a little bit and clean it up. Everything that we had in start attack and start throw transition is going to stay. Nothing has changed with that. What has changed is I've added this section right here. So I'm grabbing my character reference of the animation blueprint and setting start attack frame to the get frame count variable. You'll notice get frame count is an Unreal node and it says returns the value of G frame counter, a running count of the number of frames that have occurred. We actually use this in the code several times. We use it to print the frames that certain things happened on and how many frames have passed. We know this is a working node and it does exactly what we need. So this is where we're starting the attack or throw. This is where we want to set the start attack frame variable. So grab your character reference, set start attack frame, and then pass in get frame count. And to get the get frame count node, you literally can just type get frame count. That's simple. So now start attack and start throw transition have been updated to this. And because it's ugly, I'm going to update it one step further and just organize it like that. Now the next one we want to set is the first active frame. First active frame is when the hitbox, the strike hitbox specifically, spawns and we can start dealing damage to the character. And the strike hitbox is spawned in create active hitbox. So we can go into the create active hitbox function that we have in the animation blueprint, where we create the active hitbox or the strike hitbox. At the very end of the logic, I was setting the attack state of the character to be attack active. At this point, we're in the active state, so we want to capture the frame that we're on. And to do that, we can use our get frame count, but then set the first active frame variable. Again, we need to drag off of our character reference, but it's already here for the attack active state. So we can drag off of it, set first active frame right here, and pass in get frame count. So now the hitbox is spawned, and we have our first active frame as well. Now the next thing we want to set is the first recovery frame. And we know we're in recovery when we go into the attack recovery state, or essentially when the hitboxes are being cleared. So they are cleared on the attack animations themselves. Let's go to one, such as the mutant rifle punch right here. This is my standard light attack that I use for everything. I have these anim notifies. This spawns the proximity box. This one spawns the active or the strike hitbox. And this one tells us to remove the active hitbox. This is the ended anim notify. So if I go to my ended anim notifies in my animation blueprint and where we handle those, we can search ended if we want. And we'll get all of them. We can go to rifle punch ended, for example. They're all together though. In this behavior, we were resetting things like can combo, if we've landed the hit, and we were calling clear hitboxes. Once the strike hitbox is cleared, we know that we are entering attack recovery. We do set the character's attack state to attack recovery here as well, so that's a dead giveaway. At this point, we want to set our first recovery frame. I did set it before this both entrances finish thing, because we don't care if the entrances are finished or not here, as we shouldn't be able to even enter this behavior if the entrances have not finished. But that's old logic, and I'm not worrying about that right now. So where we set the attack state to attack recovery, I want to set my first recovery frame. Remember, you have to drag off the character reference and set first recovery frame. And then you want to pass in get frame count again. Now the last one we want to set is end attack frame. And we have this in the animation blueprint as well. Let's go back to the state machine and let's use the command 1 to idle transition rule. That is this one right here. It is automatic rule based, so once the animation ends, we start returning to idle. Let's scroll down. We have a start transition event, end attack transition. So once we start returning from command 1 to idle, we are going to call this end attack transition. And that's where we have to go in the event graph. So end attack transition. Let's go to that and notify. Again, this is paired with the end throw transition. So even though start throw transition does the same thing as start attack transition, and end throw transition does the same thing as end attack transition, I did make them separate in case we wanted to separate the behavior at all or add other things to one or the other. So in this case, both of these nodes are doing this logic that you see here. But again, let's go ahead and organize this a little bit. So I'm going to move these nodes over. All right, there we go. So I've organized this a little bit now just to show you what I've done. This is all the same behavior as it was in this already. Only difference is I've added these two nodes. End attack and end throw transition now set the end attack frame to the frame that we're on. To do this, we can use get frame count yet again, and we can pass this into the end attack frame. We want to set this by dragging off our character reference and set end attack frame. Simple enough. This will determine when the attack is ending and when we can return to idle. At this point, since the attack has ended, I also want to do something new here, and I want to call get frame data from table. Now this function is actually the manual data table function. And so we don't really want to use this, but we want to use it as an example for now. So go ahead and add this in here, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So get frame data from table is a function that we have in our character blueprint. And the reason we're calling this is what actually updates the frame data on those frame data widgets that we have during the practice mode. But see how this is called get frame data from table? Well, we're not really using the table anymore, so we don't have the proper information to pass into here. Let's go into our character blueprint and base character BP. Here is the behavior that we had in get frame data from table. We were grabbing the name of startup frames, active frames, and recovery frames from the data table that we passed in and getting the results from this. Now, I was using this temporarily for the demo, but we're going to make a new event. That way we can separate the manual and automatic logic, and we can actually use both if we want. We can either use one sometimes if we want to have manual logic, or we can have another one being used other times when we want to have automatic logic. So get frame data from table is going to be left alone, but we're going to make a new event that's just going to be get frame data, and it's not going to have a data table to reference or command index. So in my mutant and BP, I still have this get frame data from table being called. I'm going to leave that for just a minute because we're going to go make this new event and then we'll replace it. But just know we do want to grab the frame data after we set the end attack frame, because at that point we have the start attack frame, first active frame, first recovery frame, and end attack frame set. Actually calculate all of our frame data. So that's why I am calling this function here. We have all the data we need. Let's go ahead and calculate the frame data. We just need to make a new event or new function to do that. So I'm going to go back to the code, and I'm going to go back to my Flutter template character.h. So I can search for gather frame data from table, and you'll see nothing comes up. And that's because we actually had a function called gather command data from table, and we were passing in the command index. And then we were calling gather frame data from table for that because the blueprints had access to the data tables, but the code did not at the current time. So I'm going to go under this function. I'm going to say gather extra data about a command using automated methods. And we are going to make this a blueprint implementable event still, so that we can put it right next to the other one. So U function blueprint implementable event void gather frame data. Just like that. And now we don't have to call it anywhere in the code at the current time, but we probably will want to comment out the one that's doing the manual behavior, at least for this episode. That way we're not getting conflicting results and confused about what's going on. So I'm going to go to my fighter template character.cpp and search for gather command data from table. And everywhere this is used, for me it's only used in start command, I'm just going to comment it out for the time being. So I'm not deleting it. We may want to use manual in the future, or you may decide you want to use manual over automatic altogether, but you just want to see how that method works. So I'm just commenting out, not deleting it. But once it's commented out, the manual behavior will no longer fire, so we'll know that we are actually testing our automatic behavior. And we can launch again with this new event ready to go. All right, the editor is back open, so now we can go into the character blueprint again. And this time, instead of using get frame data from table, I'm going to fill out this new event instead. So let's make some space. And I have this logic here, which I'll go over in a minute. But we want to grab our new event, which is called gather frame data. See, it doesn't have any parameters or anything that we have to pass into it. So we don't have to worry about get frame data from table anymore. And now since we have this new event, let's go back into the AnimBP. And let's call this event, instead of gather frame data, get frame data from table. So let's delete this one. And instead let's call gather frame data. And I would be able to if I made it blueprint callable, but I did not. So allow me to go back into the code one more time and make that update on this function. So blueprint implementable event, comma, blueprint callable. All right, the editor is back open. I'm going back to the animation blueprint. And at this point, I'm going to drag off my character reference and search for gather frame data, and now it pops up. So I can put this in here, and we can call this function, this event, when we do the end attack or end throw transition. And so that is all the behavior we need to track in the animation blueprint. So when the attack is finished, we will display the frame data to those widgets. And the reason this works is because the widgets for the frame data are in this frame data panel, and the frame data panel has bindings on all these to the startup, the last startup frames, the last active frames, and the last recovery frames. So all we have to do is set these variables that we made during the manual frame data episodes with our calculations, and these bindings will work automatically. Let's go back to the base character BP and fill out the behavior in there. So here's my gather frame data. To get the startup frames, we take our first active frames minus our start attack frame and set last startup frames with it. So literally, get first active frame minus, it'll say integer 64 minus integer 64. We want to subtract start attack frame and pass that in. Then we want to set last startup frame. So set last startup frames. I'm going to pass in the result of the difference here, and it's going to automatically convert from int64 to integer. And this one will always be a small enough number to fit in the integer, so we don't have to worry about that. Now we want to do the same thing for last active frames, except the calculation is a little bit different. We're going to take the first recovery frame and the first active frame and subtract them. So first recovery frame minus first active frame is set to the last active frames. Then we have end attack frame minus first recovery frame is going to be the last recovery frames. Now once you've done all those, your widget should work. However, I realized while I was going over this that this could easily be a code function, and I'm going to make it one. So I know we just did this in the blueprint. We can basically keep everything that we have already. I'm just not going to do this in the blueprint. I'm going to handle this part in the code. So I'm going to delete this event from here, and I'm going to go ahead and close this and go back to fireTemplateCharacter.h. And for my gather frame data function, I'm not going to make it a blueprint implementable event. I still want it to be blueprint callable, but I'm going to have it be a regular function in my character. Then I'm going to go to right where this is at, right below start command. Let's go to start command. go under it. I'm going to make this function void a fighter template character gather frame data, and we're just going to do this manually. So we're going to say last startup frames equals first active frame minus start attack frame. Then we're going to say last active frames equals first recovery frame minus first active frame. Then we're going to say last recovery frames equals end attack frame minus first recovery frame. And there's gather frame data. Now let's launch the editor again and make sure this is working and make sure that the NMBP didn't have an issue with us changing that function. All right, the editor is open one more time, so let's go into the character blueprint. And I'm going to delete the behavior that we had for this event now that I've successfully transferred it to the code. And I'm going to go to my animation blueprint and make sure that the function is still being called properly. And here we have gather frame data, target is fighter template characters. That's still being called in the code. Even though we changed it, it's not blueprint anymore. It's being called in the code. That still works, so we're good to go. Now, if we test it, this should be fully functional. So let's go into practice mode. And let's load up a level. So here we are. If I use an attack, you'll see I get the same results I did at the start of the episode. If I land an attack, you'll see I get the same results I did at the start of the episode. And all my other attacks should have values as well. And now, with these values being automated, that is awesome, and that is great to see working. Now, for the attacks that don't, such as the X attack, I know this one has an issue. So this one shows up as negative active frames, and the startup and the recovery are accurate, but the active is negative. Well, active frames can't be negative. There's a hitbox being spawned. But this is because the active frames likely aren't being set or aren't being reset. So if we go into the animation blueprint, you'll notice in some instances in the series, I did some different behavior for some of the ended anim notifies. So like X rifle punch ended is my X attack. It is not with the other ended anim notifies. And this is because it was resetting the X attack effects. But then it was resetting Ken Combo and has landed hit, but we should be doing that anyway. So really what should happen here is I should move this whole event with my other endeds. Now I know they are over here, so don't mind me, just moving them to my ended. There we go. And now they are together. So I can see that Ken Combo and has landed hit are reset in the other endeds. So I'm going to go ahead and delete them from this portion of it. And now the only thing I'm doing differently for X attacks is resetting my X attack effects. After I reset them, I can drag it right into Ken Combo and it can do the same logic as all the other endeds. If we want, we can even organize it just for this attack, which makes all these other ones a little bit uglier, but there we go. And now I can pull this away from the other logic. And now the X attack has been added. So if I come in here and I play, we're going to go into practice again, skip through everything. I can use my X attack, and you will see that all the data is set properly now. It's not this huge negative value. For any of the attacks that you see that are not working, likely it's because the ended is a little bit different. I know the same goes for my crouch attacks. We don't have to do them all here now, but just as one other example, my crouch light and crouch medium, they have their own behavior as well. Honestly, it's pretty much the exact same behavior. Only difference is this part right here at the end, where we're setting the entrances to finished. We're not resetting the attack state. So here's my light and medium crouching. Let's bring them over to the other ended anim notifies. Right here, and let's compare. So we have Ken Combo, has landed hit, clear hitboxes, checking for both entrances finished. The only thing is the attack state is not being set to recovery, and the first recovery frame is not being set. Well, there's no reason for us to not do those things for the crouching attacks. So you know what we can do? We can actually delete the entire set of logic. There's nothing unique that has to happen here. And we can add them. Let's add these ones to the top. And let's pass it in. There we go. And so you might have to do a little bit of this work here, where you have these different animations, and you have to make sure that their notifiers are on their attacks, and then their attacks are actually being used where they should. Crouch medium to crouch state has an end attack transition as the start transition event. So that's calling the same end attack transition the other attacks do. For some reason, in my crouch light to crouch, I was calling end crouch attack transition, which is a different event. So let's go back to the event graph. And let's search for end crouch attack transition. Okay, and it looks like we're setting the character to be able to move. We're setting the attack state to none. We're setting the character state to be crouching. And then doing the regular logic for resetting variable and clearing hitboxes. Now, that's all well and good, but really, we can do this already in our end attack transition. So let's compare end attack and end crouch attack. We have can move to true, attack state to none, and character state to crouching instead of no action. So if I take my end crouch attack transition here, let's switch this and the start attack transitions, okay? So bear with me for a second. Let's move this up here with the other end attacks. And here are my start attacks down at the bottom. Now we have the end attacks next to each other. So at this point, the only difference that we're really seeing here is setting the character state to crouching. That was the reason we had end crouch attack transition. So this just means we want to do the same logic that we have here. We want to set the end attack frame and call gather frame data. And if we do that, we'll be good to go. Now let's just clean it up a little bit more because again, this gets messy quickly. See, even if we're using the end crouch attack transition that we had now we're doing the same behavior that we had for the end attack transition, except with that resulting state being crouching, not no action. And so now if we play it, go into practice, and I can use my crouching light, and you'll see the data fills out properly. So there are going to be some specific cases that you have to watch and follow and make sure that everything is working as intended. And if there are special anim notifiers for attacks, make sure you update them to work with this behavior. The reason I went through these in these such specific circumstances is because I wanted you to be able to follow it directly and make sure everything was working. But if it's not, you can just go to each anim notify like I just did live, figure out what's not working, figure out why, and just update it. It should be a fairly simple process. You just have to make sure that all your attacks are set up generally the same. So anyway, guys, that's how you can set up automatic frame data in your game. We still have a little bit more to do, such as ignoring hit stop and not counting frames when certain actions are occurring, but otherwise this is looking pretty good. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I hope it helped you out. If it did, please subscribe. It does more for myself in the series than anything else you can do. I just really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon members and supporters. Thank you guys for all the love and support over the years. Really appreciate you keeping the series going, and I'm so excited about where we can go with this in the future. If you had any issues with this tutorial, or if you want to know why some attacks have the wrong data, feel free to reach out in the Discord, and I'm sure we can figure it out. That support is completely free, so feel free to click the link in the description to get started. Anyway, guys, that's all I got, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.